that my audio failed. I don't know what's going on. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
then I don't know
Okay.
what my message is. All right. Um, Tom, thank you for patiently waiting and listening. And would you like to give us a little overview of Summit Bank and
Sure.
what you're doing with regard to banking cannabis?
Sure. Okay. If you could, so we're Summit Bank, your local community bank, and you can turn the slide. So Summit Bank was started in '82. We're the oldest woman-founded bank, community bank in California. The bank started back in 1982 because our founder, Shirley Nelson, was a top producing loan deposit officer. And she went and she got an appointment with the CEO of the bank, and she said, I'd like to talk to you about two things. One, I'd like to be considered for vice president, and two, I would like a raise because I'm outperforming all my male counterparts. And the CEO looked at her and he said, well, first of all, I would never give a woman a vice president position. And if you really want to raise, why don't you go to the bank across the street? Well, there was no bank across the street, but she got so ticked off that she said, I'm going to start my own bank. And she went to customers of hers to raise money, and they said, Shirley, you don't know anything about opening a bank. She said, I'll learn. So we opened our doors in July of 1982. We've been profitable since our second month in business. We have three branches, including Oakland, which is our world headquarters, Emeryville, Walnut Creek. Our assets have grown kind of unexpectedly in the last 6 to 7 months. A lot of it having to do with just a lot of core deposits coming in, people kind of hoarding their deposits. We started our MRB subsidiary, which is called Minerva Compliance LLC. Don't tell anything, don't tell anybody, but the name Minerva came from Shirley Nelson's grandmother. And so we started the program, it was kind of by accident. About a year, well, maybe it's been about 2 years ago, we were approached by a investment group out of Southern California to buy the bank. In fact, we engaged Gary Finley to be our representative, legal representative, did a very good job. And so the deal did not go through, but in the process, we learned a lot about the program. And so we thought, well, geez, maybe we should, we've learned so much, why don't we start a division? So we started that. We took our first customer in late January of this year. I think we're up to 6 customers with 10 accounts. And it has been, as a few slides later, it's been an interesting experience, a lot more difficult than what, first of all, we didn't really have any idea of how easy or tough it would be, but it's proven to be more difficult. That's not to say we're going to stop doing it. We're full speed ahead, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. And of course, the bank, I've only been with the bank for just about a little over 4 years. Before that, I ran a bank up in Sonoma County. So I really can't take too much credit for all the awards that the bank has won since our founding in 1982. And so this really, people, years ago, when I first became CEO of a bank, before my very first day, that weekend, I went home and I started writing down, what do I want this bank to be? What do I want us to look for? And I brought it back to my executive team and I said, add to it, punch holes through it. And so we came up with something similar to this. And I went home to my wife, who was a marketing director at Oracle. I said, what is this? Is this like our slogan, our sayings? And she goes, no. She goes, this is your brand. And I said, well, I don't think I understand really what you mean by brand. And she said, well, think of the brand as the personality of your company. Think of it, you can have a personal brand. And so this really is what we're selling. We're selling service. We're in the customer service business. We just happen to be selling financial services. So this sits on everybody's desk. It's in your job description, and it's certainly in your job evaluation, and we take it very seriously. Next slide, please. So the bank has really, since its founding, as I mentioned, we've been profitable since our second quarter. We have a very strong core deposit franchise. Formerly, before the influx of deposits, we were probably at 47, 48% DDA to total deposits. We're now up to 55. Our cost of funds, I always like to use percentiles because it tells you relative to, one set period of time, where do you rank? And so we're at the 6th percentile. It's a little bit up from the 5th percentile a few quarters ago, but that's okay. The bank, our margin has come down, of course, with rates dropping, but comparatively speaking, I want to say this, that our net interest margin ranked at the 91st percentile. Don't quote me on that, but it's pretty close to that. We've always been very prudent, some would say conservative, I'll say prudent, with our reserves. Before the downturn, we were still pretty close to 2%, maybe 1.8, 1.9. But if you take out the PPP, we're in excess of 2%. At this stage, I've been reading a lot of earning reports, and I know a lot of people have stopped doing as much reserve. I've kind of pulled back from that. We're not in that position yet. We just would rather have a little bit more of a cushion there. So we'll probably still remain a little bit more aggressive in this regard. Our loan portfolio has performed, admirably. I don't get too ahead of myself. We don't have any accruals, and that's why I put in there to date, but I suspect they're coming. And then here are some of the awards that we've won. We've won the top community banks in the USA. The one that I'm probably most proud of is, for the last 4 years, we've won the top 100 corporate philanthropists in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I think we ranked 7th as a percentage of our donations of our profit. And then, of course, I can't forget Super Premier Performing Bank. We've won that multiple times. I think it's 16 times, but don't quote me on that. Next slide, please. So this is what you all kind of came for, but what I did was I wrote down some of the challenges that I've encountered. I'm not doing this day to day, so I reached out to my MRB team, which at this point consists of 2 people, compliance officer and a private banker. And the main challenges, and of course, this is not like a product you can go and buy off the shelf. You could buy an SBA program, buy the officers, bring them in, and probably have a pretty good idea of how to do it. We were kind of going into this somewhat blind. And so the first thing that really stuck with us, or really stuck out, was it can literally take months to bring a client on. I mean, literally months. And we recently, in fact, my private banker called me and he said, "Tom, we did it in record time." And I go, "What's the record time?" He said, 3 weeks. And I said, "Wow, that's great." Because it usually takes 2 to 3 months. The other thing is you're really dealing with people that have been operating underground. So it's tough for them to change those habits, especially when it comes to transparency and trust. The other thing is a lot of the MRBs that we're banking, they're in the startup phase. So they're not that sophisticated. So, part of our job is to teach them some of these things. The other one is keeping customers up to date on regular monitoring requirements. It's some ways it's like pulling teeth. You just constantly have to remind them. The pandemic has had a negative effect on some of our clients who were depending on investment dollars, because that's really dried up. And then, of course, the high local taxes really impacts them, and then the licensing, insurance, rent. So it tends to kind of makes people really look at courier services. What are we paying? That type of thing. The new entrants, of course, I can't say, I don't know that many banks who have gotten into the space. I know a few, but a lot of credit unions have been in the space. And so obviously the more you have coming into this, eventually, the pie's going to get smaller, because a lot of these businesses will not make it. It's just the way it is. So I mentioned the entrance, the financial institutions getting into it. And then a lot of our locations, we're at 30th and Broadway in downtown Oakland. And we had, after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, we had a lot of demonstrations. And I want to say, 80, 90, 95% of it, people were cool. People were peaceful. But you do get people that get attracted, see this as an opportunity to do some bad mischief. There's good mischief and there's bad mischief, and this is bad mischief. And then, of course, the Northern California fires have burned some crops. So that's driving up some prices there. I heard this from a good source that there was one farmer up in Mendocino, maybe it wasn't Mendocino, maybe it was northern Sonoma County, but the fire actually came through his property and he had buried $5 million in cash and it went up in flames. So those are probably the main challenges that we've encountered right now. So next slide, and I think that's the last slide. So.
A question for you. You
Sure.
said the bank established the MRB subsidiary in November 2009. What was the thought process behind saying, okay, we're going to get into this business?
Well, as I mentioned, we were in contract to be bought by an investment group.
Right.
And in fact, when the deal first came, I thought, I don't think the regulators are going to approve this, but you never know. It takes a trailblazer to do it. And as it turns out, the regulators did not want us to do it. But we learned so much in the process that we thought, well, heck, let's put this to use. And we stay in very close contact with our regulator, our BSA auditor, my compliance officer is probably in contact with her every 2-3 weeks just to kind of, update her. This is what we're doing and that type of thing. We'll probably have our next exam in the first quarter, maybe January, February. And so I'm anticipating that it will go well simply because we've stayed in close contact with the regulator. So that's what really drove it, was this acquisition that fell through.
Hey,
Okay.
Ruth, let me add something to Tom's comment, because we were intimately involved in a lot of those conversations. Interesting that the Department of Business Oversight, now called the DPFI or whatever you want to call it today, they were very supportive and were encouraging Summit Bank, it says, to get into this particular field. They thought it was a good one, and actually were very open to the acquisition. The problem that the FDIC had is that they kept telling us, it says, hey, we're not saying you cannot do it. All we're telling you is that we don't want to have to approve what you're doing. And so that's one of the challenges that a lot of our institutions have had. If you put something in a business plan that says that you're submitting for them to approve, they're going to have tough time swallowing it. But it says if you're saying we're doing it, but you have all the systems and controls in place, then they're basically saying, okay, we're okay with that. They just don't want to put their signature on anything that says they approve anything involving the MRB business.
And the other thing that they're concerned with is that, you get over reliant on this income. And, we're a very profitable bank. And so, if it left tomorrow, maybe we'll make 200 grand, 300 grand this year, that type of thing. If it went away, it's not going to really change our main business. So that was another concern of theirs.
So Gary, it's probably not a good idea to ask Kathy Moe about any of this tomorrow. I would